The carrier Resolute died at 3:47. No explosion, no flare of light, no heroic last transmission, just a signal that stopped. On the command deck of Station Helios, nobody spoke when it happened. They watched the tactical display the way people watch a heartbeat monitor when they already know what it's about to say. A single green marker flickered once. Then it was gone. Admiral Yarachin stood with her hands behind her back, posture straight out of habit rather than purpose. Her eyes did not move from the display as the rest of the 3rd Defense Fleet followed. One by one. Blip. Gone. Blip. Gone. 3 at once. Gone. There had been 62 ships. There had been voices attached to them. Pilots she had argued with. Captains she had promoted. Engineers who had sent her reports at impossible hours with impossible optimism. Now there were symbols disappearing from a screen. No sound. No fire. Just absence. Signal loss confirmed, Reyes said quietly from his console, as if volume could change the outcome. He hadn't slept. None of them had. His voice had that thin, stretched quality that came from exhaustion pushed past its limits. Chen didn't answer. She counted instead. Not aloud. Just in her head. 58. 54. 49. The numbers didn't matter. Counting didn't change anything. But the human mind reaches for patterns when reality refuses to make sense, and counting was something she could still control. At 32, the display paused. Not because the fighting had stopped. Because there was nothing left in range to die. Silence settled over the deck. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier. Something that pressed down on the room and made breathing feel like work. Reyes turned slightly in his chair. Not fully. Just enough to look at her out of the corner of his eye. He was waiting. Not for orders. For permission. For her to say something that would make this fixable. Shin kept her eyes on the screen. There was nothing to fix. Status, she said. It came out level. Controlled. Like this was just another report in a long line of reports. Reyes swallowed. Looked back at his console. 3rd Fleet. Is gone, Admiral. Gone. Such a small word. It did not carry the weight of what it meant. It did not account for the 3 years of war that had ground those ships down from a proud armada into a desperate last line. It did not account for the people. It was just a word. She nodded once. Acknowledged. Filed. She turned away from the display. The observation window stretched across the far wall of the command deck, a wide pane of reinforced glass looking out over the curve of Luna below. The moon hung there, gray and indifferent, its surface scarred by impacts both ancient and recent. War had not changed it. War rarely changes dead things. She walked to the window slowly, each step measured. Not because she was thinking carefully, but because moving too fast felt wrong in a moment like this. Her reflection looked back at her faintly in the glass. Uniform pristine. Expression composed. Someone who still had control. Below, Earth's nearest satellite drifted in silence. Beyond it, invisible to the naked eye, the enemy waited. They had not rushed. That was the part that mattered. The conclave never rushed. They did not need to. They had dismantled 31 civilizations before humanity. 31 worlds that had fought, resisted, negotiated, surrendered. 31 endings. And in every one of them, the conclave had moved with the same steady patience. Like gravity. Like time. Unstoppable not because they were fast, but because they did not stop. Chen placed 2 fingers against the glass. Cold. Real. A point of contact with something that still existed. She held it there for a moment. Then she pulled her hand back. Get me Geneva, she said. No hesitation. No pause. Because if she stopped moving, even for a second, the weight of what had just happened might catch up with her. And there was still work to do. Behind her, the command deck came back to life in small, quiet ways. Consoles flickered. Officers straightened. Orders began to move through systems that were still intact. Not because they believed it would change the outcome, but because stopping meant admitting the outcome had already arrived. Chen returned to her station and sat. The tactical display still showed empty space where a fleet had been minutes ago. She didn't look at it again. Somewhere beyond Luna's far side, beyond the debris field that had once been humanity's defense, the conclave ships held position. Waiting. They always waited. Because they knew how this ended. And for the first time in 3 years, so did she. The bunker beneath Geneva smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. It was the kind of smell that settled into walls and refused to leave, a quiet reminder that too many people had been breathing the same air for too many days. 43 people sat around the long table. None of them looked rested. The United Nations Emergency Council had been in continuous session for 9 days, and it showed in the details: the loosened collars, the untouched cups of coffee gone cold, the stacks of printed reports scattered across the table like relics from another century. They had stopped trusting screens 3 cyber attacks ago. Paper didn't lie. Paper couldn't be rewritten from orbit. Admiral Yara Chun appeared on the main wall display, her image resolving into focus a second before the room fell completely silent. She was still in uniform, still composed, still standing, which, given what she had just witnessed, was more than most of them could manage. Director Osei, who chaired the council, didn't waste time. "The motion is on the table," he said. No preamble, no attempt to soften it. Conditional surrender to the conclave. Negotiated terms. Preservation of civilian infrastructure. Preservation of a controlled population. He paused, not because he didn't know what came next, because everyone in the room already did. "We stop losing people." The words settled over the table like dust. No one spoke immediately, not because there was disagreement, because there wasn't enough of it. That was the problem. 9 of them had already made up their minds. For had not. Chen was one of the 4. She didn't speak right away. She looked at the faces around the table, some familiar, some not, all carrying the same expression of quiet calculation. Not cruelty, not cowardice, just the weight of numbers. Billions versus survival. Dignity versus continuation. Director Osei leaned forward slightly. "Admiral, your fleet has just been engaged. Your assessment would be valuable." It wasn't a request. Chen held his gaze through the screen. "The 3rd Defense Fleet is gone," she said. No embellishment. No emotion. Just fact. A few people looked down at the table. One of them closed their eyes briefly, as if confirming something they had already suspected. "And your recommendation?" Osei asked. There it was. The moment where reality was supposed to bend into policy. Chen didn't hesitate. "Their terms have never resulted in a surviving civilization." A shift in the room. Subtle. But there. One of the council members, a man representing what remained of the European bloc, exhaled sharply. "We don't know that," he said. Chen looked at him. "Yes," she said. "We do." Silence again. Different this time. Sharper. "They have processed 31 species," she continued. 31. Not one has reemerged. Not one has maintained independent structure, culture, or identity. She paused. Asked them how it went. A bitter edge slipped into her voice. Not loud, not uncontrolled, but present. The man met her stare. "We can't ask them," he said. "That," Chen replied, "is precisely the point." The words landed harder than anything raised in volume could have. Around the table, the weight shifted again, not toward hope, but toward something more uncomfortable. Doubt. Director Osei folded his hands. "The alternative," he said carefully, "is extinction." "No," Chen said. The interruption was quiet, but absolute. "The alternative is we stop pretending this is survival." A few heads lifted at that. Chen leaned slightly closer to the camera, not enough to be aggressive, just enough to be undeniable. "They are not offering coexistence. They are offering conversion, reduction, assimilation into a system where we no longer exist as ourselves." Her eyes moved across the room, meeting each of them in turn. "That is not survival. That is disappearance with better infrastructure." No one spoke, because there wasn't an easy counter to that. There were only numbers, and numbers didn't argue. They just accumulated. 9-4. That was the reality sitting at the table. Director Osei exhaled slowly. "We are out of options, Admiral." Chen shook her head once. "No," she said. "We are out of easy ones." Another silence. Longer this time. He looked down at the table, then back up at her. "The vote has been called," he said. Of course it had. It always was. One by one, the council members cast their decisions. Some spoke firmly. Some barely above a whisper. Some didn't look at the camera at all. 9 in favor. 4 against. The outcome was never in doubt. It rarely is, when fear outweighs conviction. "The motion passes," Osei said quietly. No applause. No relief. Just finality. The official record would note the time. The votes. The names. History liked clean entries. It never captured the feeling of the room when decisions like that were made. "There will be 6 hours," Osei continued, "to transmit formal acceptance." 6 hours. An eternity. Or nothing at all. He looked at Chen one last time. Your descent will be recorded. She nodded. Good. A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, add a comment. Ose hesitated. Go ahead. Chen didn't need time to think. We don't kneel. 3 words. No explanation. None needed. The transmission ended. The room in Geneva remained still for several seconds after her image disappeared, as if something had been removed that left the air thinner behind it. On Station Helios, Chen stood in silence. Reyes glanced at her. They voted, didn't they? She didn't look at him. Yes. A beat. For surrender? Yes. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. There was no anger in his expression. No shock. Just a quiet understanding of how things like this went. What do we do? He asked. Chen looked back at the tactical display. Empty space. Where a fleet had been. Where a future had been, if things had gone differently. Then she straightened. Same as before, she said. Reyes frowned slightly. Which is? She met his eyes. We don't kneel. Somewhere beyond the moon, the Conclave fleet continued to wait. 6 hours. They would give humanity the full time. They always did. Because they understood something humanity was only beginning to accept. That when a species reaches the end, it needs time to convince itself that surrender was its own decision. Not something inevitable, just something chosen. And in 6 hours, Earth would choose. Or so they believed. The transmission did not come from a government. It did not come from a command center, or a military channel, or any official network still trying to pretend it had control over what was happening. It came from a fishing boat. An old man stood at the edge of it, one hand resting on a railing that had seen more years than most of the people still alive. The sea behind him was gray and restless, rising and falling in slow, patient motions that had nothing to do with war. The camera had been propped up, slightly tilted, the kind of framing that happens when no one is trying to make something perfect. He looked into it for a long moment before speaking. Not because he was unsure, because he wanted to be understood. The translation system caught his words a second later, overlaying them in hundreds of languages as the signal spread outward. I have lived long enough, he said, voice steady despite the wind, to know when something is wrong. He glanced once at the horizon, then back at the camera. They say we should surrender. A pause. A breath. No. The feed cut. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. Then another image replaced it. A classroom. The walls were cracked. One window had been patched with something that wasn't glass. The lighting flickered slightly, like the power wasn't sure it wanted to stay on. A girl stood at the front of the room. 12, maybe. Her uniform was worn at the edges, collar slightly torn. She held her hands at her sides, not fidgeting, not afraid. The camera zoomed in a little too much, struggling to focus. She didn't wait for it. They told us, she said, carefully, like she had practiced the words, that we can live if we say yes. Her eyes didn't move. She looked directly into the lens. I don't want to live like that. A breath. Small, but controlled. No. Cut. A farmer. The field behind him was half burned, the soil blackened in long streaks where something had passed through it weeks ago. But there were green shoots pushing up through the ash, stubborn and uneven. He wiped his hands on his pants before speaking, leaving dark streaks of dirt across the fabric. They think we don't understand, he said. His voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime working things that either grew or didn't. We understand. He looked down briefly at the ground, then back up. You don't kneel to something that plans to erase you. A small shake of his head. No. Cut. A mechanic. Grease still on his hands. Tools scattered across a workbench behind him. The remains of something half-repaired sitting open like a question nobody had time to answer. He leaned slightly toward the camera. Look, he said. I'm not a soldier. A faint, humorless smile. Never was. He gestured vaguely off-screen. But I know broken when I see it. His expression hardened just a fraction. And this? A pause. This is broken. He straightened. No. Cut. A grandmother. She sat in a plastic chair in what had once been a small courtyard, the walls around her chipped and worn but still standing. There was sunlight here, softer than the harsh artificial lighting of bunkers and ships. She laughed. Not loudly. Not mockingly. Just genuinely. As if the question itself had amused her. They asked if we would accept, she said, shaking her head slightly. Her eyes were bright. Clear. As if she had already made peace with whatever came next. My whole life, she continued, I have seen people try to tell us what we are allowed to be. She leaned forward a little. That has never worked out for them. The smile didn't leave her face. No. Cut. A soldier. Uniform torn. Face marked with soot and something darker. He didn't bother to clean up for the camera. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into the bones. They told us to stand down, he said. His voice was quiet. Controlled. We didn't. A pause. He looked past the camera for a second, like he was checking something, then back again. We won't. No emphasis. No speech. Just a statement. No. The transmission continued. Not organized. Not planned. Just connected. A nurse in a dim hospital corridor. A group of children standing together, none of them speaking until one of them did. A pilot recording from inside a cockpit, alarms quietly blinking behind her. A teacher. A dock worker. A scientist. A man who had clearly lost everything and still stood in front of the camera because there was something left to say. Different places. Different languages. Different lives. One word. No. The signal stitched itself together across failing satellites and damaged relays, jumping from system to system, held together by whatever fragments of infrastructure still functioned. No central authority. No approval. No permission. It ran for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of humanity answering a question it had not agreed to be asked. On the bridge of a conclave command vessel, Supreme Executor Voron watched the transmission in silence. He had expected capitulation. He had seen it before. Species reach a point where resistance becomes mathematically unreasonable, and at that point, they choose continuation. It was predictable. Efficient. This was not that. He watched the old man again. Then the child. Then the others. Not once. 3 times. His tactical officer remained at his station, hands still, saying nothing. He had learned when silence was appropriate. This was one of those times. Voron paused the feed. The grandmother's face remained on the display, her expression unchanged, her quiet amusement frozen in time. He studied it. Not because it held tactical value. Because it did not fit. There was no strategic advantage in refusal. No measurable gain. And yet, he closed the file. Prepare bombardment coordinates, he said. His voice carried no irritation. No anger. Just continuation. Primary population centers first. Then infrastructure. The tactical officer nodded and began entering commands. Outside, the fleet adjusted slightly, precise movements unfolding across hundreds of ships as they aligned for the next phase. The transmission had changed nothing. It was not supposed to. That was not how outcomes worked. And yet, as Voron turned back to his display, there was a brief, unclassified sensation in the back of his thoughts. Not doubt. Not concern. Something less defined. The kind of thing that appears when a pattern does not behave the way it always has. He ignored it. Because patterns always resolved eventually. They always returned to what they were supposed to be. And humanity, like the 31 civilizations before it, would do the same. Somewhere on Station Helios, Admiral Chun watched the final seconds of the transmission as it ended. No music. No closing statement. Just a signal that stopped. She stood there for a moment, looking at the blank screen where faces had been. Reyes let out a slow breath. That wasn't official, he said. No, Chun replied. It won't change anything. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the screen. No, she said finally. It won't. A pause. Then, quieter. But it matters. Beyond the station, beyond the moon, beyond the thin line separating what still existed from what was about to be taken. 200 conclave warships shifted into bombardment formation. The timer continued to count down. 6 hours had almost passed. Humanity had given its answer. Now the universe would give its reply. At the edge of the solar system, where light from the sun thinned into something pale and distant, Priya Vasquez was staring at numbers. Not dramatic numbers. Not the kind that came with alarms or flashing warnings or anything that made people stand up and pay attention. Just data. Long-range gravitational readings scrolling across her screen in steady, predictable patterns. She was on hour 14 of a 16-hour shift. Her eyes felt like they had been lined with sand. Every blink came with resistance. Every number blurred slightly before snapping back into place. This was not the part of the war anyone talked about. No speeches were made about monitoring stations. No medals were awarded for noticing things that might matter later. This was where you sat and watched and hoped something didn't happen. Or, if it did, that you noticed it. Priya adjusted her posture slightly, rolling one shoulder as she ran another standard sweep of the outer system. Routine. Mechanical. The kind of task your hands learn while your mind drifts somewhere else, like whether there was any food left in the break room, or if the coffee machine had finally stopped working for good. The scan completed. Another one started. Then, she paused. Not because the system told her to, because something felt wrong. It took her a second to find it again. A small irregularity near the edge of the display. Barely noticeable. The kind of thing that could be explained a dozen different ways without anyone losing sleep over it. Instrument drift. Background interference. A minor fluctuation in gravitational noise from some distant, irrelevant mass. Priya leaned forward slightly. Zoomed in. The anomaly resolved into something clearer. Still small. Still subtle. But wrong. She frowned. Natural anomalies had a kind of randomness to them. Uneven edges. Chaotic distribution. They looked like noise because they were noise. This didn't. This had shape. Not a perfect shape, but a deliberate one. Like something very large was sitting just out of view, its presence bleeding into detectable space in ways it wasn't meant to. Priya stared at it for a long moment. Then she checked the timestamp. The anomaly hadn't appeared suddenly. It had been there. For at least 2 scan cycles. Maybe longer. She hadn't noticed it before. Her fingers hovered over the console. This was the part where experience mattered. The part where you decided whether something was worth interrupting someone over. Her supervisor had made that very clear earlier. 14 times, to be exact. Don't interrupt unless something is on fire. Priya glanced at the anomaly again. It wasn't on fire. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there. She opened a report. Flagged the coordinates. Added the data. Her fingers moved quickly now, the familiar rhythm of documentation taking over. Gravitational irregularity detected at outer system boundary, she typed. Signature inconsistent with known natural phenomena. Further analysis recommended. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then set the priority. Medium. The highest she was authorized to assign without approval. She hit send. The report vanished from her screen, absorbed into the system. Queued. Filed. Waiting. Priya leaned back in her chair. Exhaled slowly. That was it. That was all she could do. She looked at the anomaly one more time. It hadn't changed. Still small. Still quiet. Still easy to ignore. She turned back to her main display. There were other scans to run. Other numbers to watch. The war, as far as her station was concerned, continued in the background of everything. Far away. Abstract. Something happening somewhere else. The queue updated in the corner of her screen. 847 items. Her report slotted in at position 847. She didn't notice. She was already running the next sweep. Far beyond Neptune. Beyond the scattered debris of ancient collisions and forgotten objects drifting through cold darkness. The anomaly shifted. Not suddenly. Not violently. Just enough that, if anyone had been watching closely enough, they might have seen the edge of it move. A fraction. A degree. As if something had adjusted its position. As if something had decided where it was going. But no one was watching that closely. Not anymore. On Station Helios, the countdown continued. On the Conclave fleet, bombardment calculations finalized. On Earth, people waited. And in a queue buried under hundreds of reports that all seemed more urgent. A single line of data sat quietly. Unread. Unnoticed. Waiting for someone to realize that it should never have been there at all. The first ship launched 18 minutes after the order. It did not look like a warship. The frigate Khatun slipped free from Station Helios with a slow, deliberate motion, its engines flaring to life in a way that felt more like effort than power. Its hull carried scars from 3 years of war, patchwork plating, mismatched sections where repairs had been made with whatever was available. Captain Fatima Raza watched the station fall away behind her. For a moment, she thought about Rice. Not strategy, not formations, not the 200 conclave ships waiting ahead. Rice, the way her mother used to make it. The sound of the lid lifting slightly as steam built beneath it. The smell that filled the kitchen before anything else did. She held on to that thought longer than she should have, because it was easier than thinking about what came next. Helm, bring us to Vector, she said. Her voice was steady. It always was. Course locked, her pilot replied. The Khatun accelerated. Behind it, the rest of what remained of Earth's fleet followed. 14 ships. That was all. 3 frigates. one carrier barely holding together, and 11 mining vessels that had never been meant for combat. They spread out as they moved, not in a formation designed for victory, but in one designed to exist for as long as possible. On the tactical display aboard Station Helios, Admiral Chen watched them go. 14 small markers moving toward 200. The conclave formation was already visible at long range, clean, precise, arranged with the kind of symmetry that came from repetition. They had done this before. They knew exactly how it ended. Time to contact? Chen asked. 3 hours, 40 minutes, Reyes replied. She nodded once. Behind the numbers, behind the projections, behind everything that made sense, there was nothing. No reinforcement coming. No hidden reserve. No plan that turned this into anything other than what it was. A delay. That was all they could offer. Time. Time measured in minutes, maybe hours. Time that would be spent. The conclave detected them almost immediately. On the bridge of the Ascendant Principal, Supreme Executor Voron listened as his tactical officer delivered the report. 14 vessels, the officer said. Mixed classification. Minimal threat. Voron gave a slight nod. Not dismissive. Just accurate. Adjust formation, he said. Maintain bombardment schedule. No urgency. No deviation. The fleet shifted with smooth precision, sections peeling away from the main body to intercept the approaching human ships. Not aggressively. Not with overwhelming force. Just enough. Enough to remove the obstacle. The way you remove something small from your path without breaking stride. The engagement began at a range that made no tactical sense, which was appropriate, because there was no tactic left that made sense. The Khatun fired first. Missiles streaked forward, their guidance systems pushing them toward targets that had already adapted to weapons like these months ago. Most were intercepted. Some were not. One struck the hull of a conclave destroyer. It did not explode. It did not shatter. It vented atmosphere slowly, listing slightly off its assigned vector. One ship. Damaged. Not destroyed. Raza watched it happen. Again, she said. Her crew reloaded. Fired. Moved. There was no hesitation. Because hesitation implied there was something to preserve. There wasn't. The conclave responded. Not with anger. Not with escalation. With precision. A beam lanced out from one of their ships. It struck the frigate Endurance. Once. Twice. 3 times. The Endurance went dark. No explosion. Just a signal that stopped. Chen closed her eyes for half a second. Then opened them. Keep firing, she said over the channel. Keep moving. The mining vessels entered range next. They were enormous compared to the frigates, slow, heavy constructs built to haul or not fight wars. Railguns had been bolted onto their frames. Weapons that looked wrong, like tools forced into a purpose they had never been designed for. One of them, Bautista's Pride, fired. The slug crossed the distance and punched through the side of a conclave cruiser. A clean hit. Effective. The cruiser drifted. Not destroyed, but changed. Moments later, a beam struck the mining vessel. Midship. The ship broke apart into 5 large sections and a cloud of smaller fragments. No time for reaction. No time for anything. Chen watched it happen. She didn't look away. There was a habit she had developed over the years. One she had never spoken about. When a ship was lost, she said its name. Not aloud. Never aloud. Just once in her mind. Endurance. Bautista's Pride. A record. A receipt. Something to carry forward when nothing else remained. Admiral, Reyes said quietly. They're splitting formation. She saw it. Most of the conclave fleet was engaging the 14 ships. Containing them. That was the word. Containing. Like something small and inconvenient. But 20 ships. 20 had broken away. They were moving past the engagement. Toward Earth. Their beginning bombardment approach, the tactical officer reported. Chen stared at the display. 43 years of memory compressed into a single moment of helpless awareness. There was nothing she could do. No maneuver. No command. Nothing that would change the trajectory of those 20 ships. The first strike hit at 6:19. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was precise. A section of coastline vanished from the feed, not in fire, but in absence. Structures remained. Infrastructure stood. The people were gone. Chen did not watch the surface feed again. Maintain pressure, she said. Her voice did not break. Her hands did not shake. Do not disengage. Because if they stopped, if they pulled back, then everything that had already been lost would have been lost for nothing. On the Khatun, Raza brought her ship around for another pass. 2 Conclave destroyers adjusted course to intercept. She saw them. Calculated. Committed. "Helm, push it," she said. The ship surged forward. Behind her, another mining vessel cut across her trajectory, firing a railgun round that struck one of the pursuing ships. The destroyer spun. The second one adjusted to avoid it. The mining vessel was hit a second later. Gone. Raza didn't look back. She used the opening. Because that was the exchange now. Time. Space. Lives. On Station Helios, Chen tracked it all. Every movement. Every loss. Every second bought at a cost that could not be repaid. "Time remaining?" she asked. 2 hours, Reyes said. 2 hours. Against inevitability. She nodded once. Behind the numbers, behind the battle, behind everything, there was a quiet understanding settling in. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting because stopping was not an option, because surrender had been chosen, and they had refused it. Out there, 14 ships had become 12, then 10, then fewer, each one still moving, still firing, still choosing. And somewhere beyond it all, far past the edges of the battle, something was already on its way. It happened without warning. One moment, space between Earth and the Conclave fleet was empty. Vacuum, debris, the silent aftermath of 3 years of war stretched across thousands of kilometers. The next moment, something was there. No flare, no emergence, no transition. It did not arrive the way ships arrive. It simply existed. The first indication was not visual. It was pressure. Cho felt it before he understood it. A distortion rolled through space like something vast had shifted its weight, a compression that struck the Honshu not as an impact, but as a presence. The hull shuddered, not from damage, but from contact with something that should not have been possible. His instruments reacted first. Numbers spiked. Not gradually. Instantly. Gravitational readings surged beyond calibrated limits, flooding his screens with data that refused to stabilize. Mass estimates recalculated, failed, recalculated again. "Contact," he started, then stopped. Because the word didn't fit. He stared at the display. Between Earth and the Conclave formation, there was a ship, if it could be called that. It was enormous. Not large in the way warships are large, built for scale and intimidation. Large in the way mountains are large. In the way things are when size is not meant to impress, but simply exists because nothing has ever needed to limit it. Cho tried to measure it. His system returned a number, then returned another, then several at once. None of them agreed. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "That's not possible," he said. Around him, the Honshu fell into a strange, stunned quiet. The Conclave fleet reacted next. 3 destroyers on the inner edge of their formation drifted, not struck, not damaged, simply displaced. The wave that had accompanied the arrival pushed them aside the way a current moves objects in water. Controlled. Effortless. They corrected course immediately. Professional. Disciplined. But the formation had shifted. For the first time since the war began, the Conclave formation was imperfect. On Station Helios, every system lit up at once. Alarms tried to categorize what they were detecting and failed. Chen stood at her station, eyes fixed on the main display. She didn't speak, didn't move. For 7 full seconds, she simply looked. The thing on the screen did not behave like anything she had ever seen. It did not maneuver. It did not adjust position. It sat between Earth and the Conclave fleet, not blocking in a physical sense. Space was too vast for that. But in every way that mattered. It stood in the way. Reyes turned toward her slowly. "Admiral," he said, then stopped. Because he didn't have a question. He didn't have words. Neither did she. On the bridge of the Ascendant Principle, Supreme Executor Voron stared at the same image. His system cycled through identification protocols at maximum speed. Hull profile, material composition, energy signatures. Everything returned the same result. No match. The database contained records from 600 years of Conclave expansion. Every known species. Every known vessel type. Nothing resembled this. "Classification?" he asked. "No match," his analyst replied. "Unknown construction. Unknown material." Voron watched the display. The ship had no visible weapons. No recognizable structure that suggested purpose beyond presence. It was still. Not inactive. Not dormant. Still. The kind of stillness that comes from certainty. Targeting, he asked. His tactical officer hesitated. We are unable to achieve a consistent lock. Voron turned his head slightly. Explain. The hull readings are inconsistent, the officer said. Sensors are returning multiple material profiles simultaneously. The system cannot resolve a stable solution. Voron absorbed that. Behind him, alarms continued to speak in overlapping tones, each system attempting to define something that did not fit within its parameters. He ignored them. Focused. The ship had appeared inside their operational space. Without warning, without transition, without permission. That alone should have defined it as a threat. And yet, it had not attacked. It had not advanced. It had simply placed itself between them and their objective. Voron felt something unfamiliar move through his thoughts. Not fear. He had commanded fleets for 2 centuries. He did not experience fear the way lesser commanders did. But this was close enough to be noticed. On Helios, Chen finally spoke. All ships, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. Hold position. Do not fire. Do not approach. Reyes looked at her. Admiral, what is that? She kept her eyes on the display. I don't know. It was the first time she had said those words in a long time, and meant them completely. The Conclave fleet had stopped. All 200 ships. The 20 executing bombardment runs halted mid-approach, their vectors frozen as if someone had reached into the system and paused it. The entire formation shifted subtly. Not advancing. Not retreating. Reforming. Defensive. Chen watched it happen. For 3 years, she had studied the Conclave. Their patterns. Their behavior. Their absolute, unshakable certainty. This was not that. They were adapting. Not to an attack. To a presence. She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. They're hesitating, Reyes said quietly. Chen didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both saw it. The most powerful military force humanity had ever encountered was unsure. Out in the void, the unknown ship remained motionless. No engines flared. No weapons charged. It did nothing. And in doing nothing, it changed everything. Cho stared at his readings again. The numbers had stabilized. Or rather, they had stopped trying to make sense. The system had given up categorizing the object and settled into raw observation. Mass, scale, energy, all of it beyond anything he had ever recorded. He swallowed. Admiral, he said over the channel, it's not decelerating. A pause. Then, it didn't decelerate at all. Chen closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, because she understood what that meant. Whatever this thing was, it had not traveled here in any way humanity understood. It had simply chosen to be here. On the ascendant principle, Voron made a decision. Alert the fleet, he said. Defensive configuration. Orders moved instantly. The Conclave ships shifted, tightening formation, closing gaps, adjusting vectors to account for an unknown variable that had just entered the equation. Voron kept his gaze on the display. 31 civilizations. 31 outcomes. This was the first time. Something had been waiting at the end. He didn't understand it. Not yet. But he recognized something far more important than understanding. Uncertainty. And uncertainty changed everything. Between his fleet and the planet below, the unknown ship remained. Silent. Immovable. Certain. As if it had been on its way for a very long time. And had arrived exactly when it intended to. The signal came without distortion. Not broad spectrum this time. Not scattered across every frequency like the earlier transmission. Focused. Deliberate. Directed at one place. Station Helios. Reyes looked up from his console, eyes narrowing as the incoming signal stabilized. It's targeting us, he said. Chen didn't move her gaze from the main display. Put it through. A brief hesitation. Then, yes, Admiral. The channel opened. At first, there was only static. Not interference. Not failure. Something else. Like 2 systems trying to understand each other and not quite agreeing on how. Then the static shifted. Resolved. And a voice came through. It was not what anyone expected. It was not vast. Not echoing. Not layered with alien resonance or artificial weight. It was quiet. Old. Not weak. Just worn. Like something that had existed long enough to choose its words carefully. We apologize, the voice said slowly, each syllable deliberate, constructed with care. Translation requires adjustment. Reyes glanced at Chun. Her expression did not change. We are ready, she said. A pause. Then the voice again. We have been preparing for this communication for a long time. Another pause. We request Admiral Chun. Reyes looked at her again. She nodded. This is Chun, she said. Silence. Then, we know. A faint shift in the tone. Not emotion. Recognition. We have known, since your first transmissions. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Known what? The voice took a moment to respond, as if selecting the correct words mattered more than speed. Your species, it said. Your pattern. A beat. The refusal to turn away. Chen didn't answer immediately. Behind her, the command deck remained completely still. No one spoke. No one moved more than necessary. Even the system seemed quieter. Watching. Listening. You intervened, Chen said. You placed yourself between us and the conclave. A slight pause. Yes. Why? That was the question. The only one that mattered. On the other end of the channel, something shifted. Not audibly, but perceptibly, as if the answer required more than language. We would prefer, the voice said slowly, to speak in person. Reyes inhaled slightly. Chen didn't. You are in the middle of an active war zone, she said. You understand the risk. We do. A pause. We accept it. Another pause. We ask the same of you. Chen looked at the display again. The unknown ship remained exactly where it had been since it appeared. Immovable. Patient. The conclave fleet held position beyond it, silent and watchful. Waiting. For something. She made her decision. Docking clearance granted, she said. Reyes turned toward her sharply. Admiral. Do it. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Yes, Admiral. The shuttle arrived 12 minutes later. It was smaller than anyone expected. Simple. Functional. It moved through the debris field with precise control, navigating the wreckage of 3 years of war as if it had done this 1,000 times before. It docked without error. Chen was already in the bay when the hatch opened. 3 officers stood behind her, armed. Still, she had left her sidearm holstered. Not because she trusted what was coming through that door, because she understood that drawing it would not matter. The hatch opened, and something stepped through. It was not large. That was the first thing that registered. Not imposing, not overwhelming. Smaller than her. Its form was narrow, its structure refined down to something essential. Its skin, or what passed for it, was pale, almost colorless, as if it had spent a very long time away from light. Its eyes were dark, large, not expressive, but aware, deeply aware. It looked around the bay once, taking in everything, measuring. Then its gaze settled on Chun. It spoke. The first words were not in her language. Then it paused, adjusted, and tried again. I am the last formal voice of the veil. The translation system caught up a fraction of a second later. The words settled into the room. Veil. Chen felt something shift. Not recognition, but significance. There are others, it continued. Not many. We are what remains. A pause. 300. Chen held its gaze. You put yourself between us and the conclave, she said again. Her voice was steady, controlled, but sharper now. I need to know why. The being was silent for a moment. Then, yes, a slight inclination of its head. You deserve that first. It took a step closer. Not threatening, not cautious, just intentional. 40,000 years ago, it said, we were ending. The words were simple. The meaning was not. We had completed everything we intended to complete. We had answered every question we knew how to ask. A pause, and we found no reason to continue. Chen didn't interrupt. Behind her, the officers remained motionless. Listening, the being continued. Our population declined. Not through conflict. Not through failure. Another pause. Through choice. A longer silence. We built one final vessel. A last attempt to find something we had not yet understood. Its eyes shifted slightly. Not away from her. Through her. As if looking at something far behind the present moment. The vessel failed. Chen's expression didn't change. But something in her posture did. Subtle. Attentive. We arrived in the wrong system, the being said. With insufficient capacity to repair or continue. A breath. Not physical. Conceptual. There was a world. Chen's voice was quiet now. And the being looked at her. They found us. A pause. They did not understand us. Another pause. They did not need to. Chen frowned slightly. What do you mean? The being tilted its head. Your species, it said. A beat. Before you were yourselves. The words settled into the space between them. Heavy. You had no language for us. no concept of what we were. Its voice did not change, but something beneath it did. You approached anyway. Chen didn't move, didn't speak. They brought food. It continued. It was incompatible with our biology. A pause. They brought it anyway. Another pause. They built fires. They remained nearby. Its gaze sharpened slightly. Predators approached. A longer pause. They defended us. Chen felt something tighten in her chest. They died, the being said. Simply. Without emphasis. Without dramatics. Just fact. They had no concept of species distinction. No concept of debt. A beat. They acted because something was in need. Silence filled the bay. Not empty. Full. The kind of silence that comes when something has been understood, but not yet processed. Chen spoke. Quiet. And those beings? The being looked at her. They became many things, it said. A pause. Over time. Another. They became you. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Chen stood very still. Behind her, one of the officers shifted slightly, the smallest movement possible, as if grounding themselves in something physical. You're saying, Chen said slowly, that humanity. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The being did it for her. You are the continuation of a choice made without expectation. A pause. We recorded it. Another. We remembered. Chen looked at it. Really looked. At something older than anything she had ever encountered. Something that had crossed 40,000 years. For this moment. The message, she said. The one you broadcast. The being inclined its head slightly. Yes. Chen held its gaze. The dead is old, she said. A breath. We remember. The being was silent. Then, yes. Nothing else. Because nothing else was needed. Outside, beyond the walls of the station, 200 conclave warships waited. And for the first time in 31 civilizations, they were not certain how this would end. The conclave moved first. Not the flagship. Not Supreme Executor Voron. A destroyer at the outer edge of the formation. A small decision. A contained action. The kind of thing that usually did not matter. The commander of that vessel made a calculation. Unknown entity. Unverified capability. Obstruction to an active operation. Remove obstruction. The logic was sound. It always had been. The destroyer fired. A beam lanced across the void, precise and immediate, striking the unknown ship dead center. On Station Helios, every sensor tracked it. Every eye watched. The beam reached the hull. And then, it stopped being what it was. Not reflected. Not absorbed. It simply ceased. Like a word repeated too many times until it loses meaning. The energy touched the surface and vanished into nothing that could be measured. The hull did not glow. Did not scar. Did not react. It remained exactly as it had been. Unchanged. Reyes made a sound under his breath. Not a word. Just the human response to something that refused to fit inside understanding. Chen didn't move. She watched. Because this was the answer. The unknown ship responded. Not with light. Not with force. The conclave destroyer stopped. That was the only way to describe it. One moment it was active. Engines engaged. Weapons systems online. Crew functioning. The next, it wasn't. Section by section. The drives went first. Then weapons. Then internal systems dimmed. Lights shifting to emergency red. No explosion. No breach. No visible damage. Just a system that had been functioning. And no longer was. It drifted. Alive. But no longer a threat. The entire exchange took 11 seconds. Then the unknown ship was still again. As if nothing had happened. On the bridge of the ascendant principle, silence spread. Not confusion. Not panic. Something deeper. Recognition. Voron stared at the disabled vessel. Life signs stable. Crew intact. Systems inert. The response had been precise. Measured. Proportional. It had removed the threat. Nothing more. Nothing less. His tactical officer spoke carefully. Awaiting orders, sir. Voron did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on the display. 31 civilizations. 31 operations. Every one of them predictable. Every one of them contained. This was not contained. He opened the historical record again. Fragments. Ancient data. References to a civilization that predated most known species. The Veil. A name that existed more in myth than in fact. Until now. He read one line again. Then again. Then he closed it. Hold all fire, he said. The words were quiet. Absolute. A pause. The tactical officer blinked once. Fleet-wide, sir. Voron turned slightly. Yes. A beat. No weapons discharge without direct authorization. Orders transmitted. Across 200 ships, systems paused. Weapons cooled. Targeting locks disengaged. For the first time in 3 years, the conclave stopped advancing. On Station Helios, Chen watched it happen. They're stopping, Reyes said. She nodded. Not surprised. Just confirming. They understand, she said. What? She kept her eyes on the display. That this isn't a battle anymore. Outside, the unknown ship remained between them. Unmoving. Untouched. Unchallenged. But not passive. Waiting. Voron exhaled slowly. Not fatigue. Not hesitation. Calculation. He opened a channel. Not broad. Not to the fleet. To the ship. The unknown. The ancient. The thing that had placed itself between inevitability and interruption. This is Supreme Executor Voron of the Conclave, he said. His voice carried authority. Measured. Controlled. We request clarification of intent. The response came immediately. No delay. No processing time. As if it had already been prepared. We are present. A pause. For the fulfillment of an obligation. Voron's eyes narrowed slightly. Define obligation. Silence. Then, a debt. The words settled into the space between them. Voron felt that same unfamiliar sensation again. Not fear, but something adjacent to it. You interfere with a sanctioned operation, he said. The reply did not change. We remember. No explanation. No expansion. Just certainty. On Helios, Chen closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, because she understood something now. Not everything, but enough. She stepped forward slightly. Open a channel, she said. Reyes hesitated, then nodded. The connection linked. Admiral Chen, she said. Her voice carried across the void. Clear. Steady. We acknowledge your presence. A pause. Then, quieter. And your memory. The unknown ship did not respond immediately. For the first time, there was a delay. Not technical. Deliberate. Then, you choose not to kneel. Chen didn't hesitate. No. Silence. Then, confirmed. Outside, the conclave formation shifted again. Not forward. Not aggressive. Repositioning. Creating distance. Spacing. Uncertainty expressed as geometry. Voron watched it all. The unknown ship. The human fleet. What remained of it. The planet below. 8 billion lives. 31 precedents. And one variable that had never existed before. He made his decision. Withdraw bombardment units, he said. The words carried across his bridge. Final. The tactical officer turned. Sir. Voron didn't look at him. Execute. Orders moved. 20 ships broke formation. Pulled back. The bombardment run. Ended. On Helios, Reyes stared at the display. They're pulling back. Chen exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. Just acknowledgement. The pressure had shifted. The inevitability. Broken. Not destroyed. Not defeated. But interrupted. And sometimes, that was enough. Out in the void, between Earth and everything that had come to end it, the ancient ship remained. Still. Patient. Certain. It had waited 40,000 years. It could wait longer. And for the first time since the war began, humanity was no longer alone.